Joining me over the phone is a candidate to represent the Olympic Peninsula in Congress, Rebecca Parson. Good morning.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks so much for having me. Excited.
Absolutely. It's nice to get a chance to hear from the candidates and learn a little bit more about them as we start getting closer and closer to the primary election. So, let's just start off on just kind of the basic. Who is Rebecca Parson? What's your story?
Well, I live in Tacoma, and I'm a commissioner on the Tacoma Commission on Disabilities, where I chair the committee that's working to bring a wheelchair-accessible taxi service to Tacoma. I'm also an organizer and activist for renters' rights, so having more time to give notice, longer eviction notices, things like that. I also used to be a court-appointed special advocate for kids in foster care in Pierce County. And so I've been involved with, organizing, activism, and progressive values my whole adult life. And after the 2016 election, I started getting more involved in the political process, and especially finding out about our district and more about our district, that we've been blue for 55 years, that, although we have areas like Tacoma, of course, is very different from Grays Harbor County, which is different from Bainbridge. We've got a lot of variety within our district, but we still face some common problems across the district, most especially with jobs, housing, Social Security, healthcare, and the environment. So that's why I decided to run.
Why Congress? Why start off on that congressional seat if you're looking to get into politics? What drew you to that seat specifically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I decided to run for Congress in this cycle specifically because after hearing the news from the panel of UN scientists that studied climate change, they said that we have until 2030 as a country and the world actually, but here in this district in the United States, we have until 2030 to make big, bold changes to our economy to transition to renewable energy in order to avoid the worst effects of climate change. And, our incumbent, Representative Derek Kilmer, I really appreciate his public service, and I appreciate yours as well, Kyle. I know that you're mayor of Cosmopolis, and so I really appreciate, people who put their life into public service. But at the same time, Representative Kilmer does not support the Green New Deal, which is the only plan that is on the scale of what we really need to address climate change. Some of these smaller measures that we have tried in the past haven't worked. And so it's really because of that, I see climate change as a huge threat, and climate change is already affecting us here in this county. Like the tribes along the coastline on the Olympic Peninsula having to move farther upland because of rising sea levels. In Tacoma, a couple summers ago, we had ashes falling from the sky from wildfires that were hundreds of miles away. And something else that I really like about the Green New Deal is that it includes a federal jobs guarantee. And there's a huge need for good family wage union jobs across the district. And on the Olympic Peninsula, there's a history of federal jobs programs. During the Great Depression and the New Deal era, there were 7 Civilian Conservation Corps camps under FDR's jobs programs on the Olympic Peninsula. And so I see the Olympic Peninsula in particular really benefiting from getting a federal jobs guarantee so that everybody, no matter where they live, can get a good union family wage job.
When we speak of the Green New Deal, I think it's notable to mention, I was reading on your website, RebeccaForWA.com, if people want to follow along on your campaign, but one of your endorsements is from Brand New Congress. Now, can you explain that a little bit and what that kind of connection is to Green New Deal?
Yeah, Brand New Congress is an organization that started in early 2016, and they wanted to help get more progressives into Congress. They were the people who recruited Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to run for Congress, and they helped candidates like me with resources, helping us connect with, policy issues, things that we need. And we have some common issues, Green New Deal being one of them. It's really a set of overarching guidelines for me. My policies are really specific to this district. How will the Green New Deal benefit us here? How will it benefit rural Washington, not just the big cities? And then especially, Social Security is extremely important to me because this district, out of all the congressional districts in Washington state, we are number one for the number of people who are on Social Security. It's 24% of the district. And so it disturbed me, actually, to find out that on June 1st, Representative Kilmer added his name to a letter that pushes a Republican Mitt Romney attack on Social Security. And this letter, there was an article in The Intercept about it. This letter that Representative Kilmer signed calls for cuts to Social Security. And he later walked it back a little bit in emails to constituents. But it's just disturbing to have, this flip-flopping on Social Security, because I know seniors who rely on it. One grandmother in Tacoma who she takes in $750 a month. She pays $650 in rent. How is she supposed to eat? I mean, she has so little as it is. And, when it comes to her, she can't flip-flop on whether she pays the electric bill or not. She either has the money or she doesn't. And I think to call for cuts on Social Security is really out of touch with the district and how much we rely on it. And also, just with Democrats in the state, because Representative Kilmer was the only member of the Washington Democratic delegation who signed the letter. Denny Heck didn't, Pramila Jayapal didn't, Adam Smith didn't. And, I think we're in the middle of a terrible pandemic. Seniors have been isolated, stuck at home for months, worried because this coronavirus affects seniors more. And it's just a really terrible time. And, from Sequim to Aberdeen and everywhere in between, we have people who are really relying on Social Security. And I don't know why he would sign that letter in the middle of a pandemic, but it's extremely important to me to protect Social Security for people who are on it now, for people in the future, and not only protect it, but expand it. So that's a huge part of why I'm running as well.
One of the things I did notice on your website, again, RebeccaForWA.com, you highlight that you're running to give everyone a home and end homelessness in America. Now, how can we work towards this?
Good question. And I think sadly, the rest of the district in the country is unfortunately catching up to where Grays Harbor and the Olympic Peninsula have been for a long time. Homelessness has been an issue. I've spoken with people in Grays Harbor who are homeless. It's been a very serious challenge there for a long time. And so we really need to take bold action. I think in a country that's as wealthy as we are, where we can afford to do a $4 trillion bailout for corporations to help them survive coronavirus, we can definitely afford to provide housing for everybody and make sure that everybody has a home. And being somebody who's involved with tenants' rights in Tacoma, I've learned a lot over the years about housing policy, and a lot of it is local. A lot of housing policy is set at the local level. The big gap that I see is that there's not enough money at the local level. The federal government needs to provide more money to cities, towns, and counties to build the housing that they need in the way that makes the most sense for their local area, their challenges, and the stuff that they need. And so that's where I see the federal government coming in. It's estimated that we're short 12 million units of housing across the country.
One of the things...
Are you still there?
I am. Yeah.
Great. Sorry about that. I thought it dropped for a second.
Oh, no problem. One of the things I was noticing, and again, your connection to Brand New Congress, Our Revolution, the DSA, one of the highlights that you're looking at on your issues is you're not taking any money from big corporate PACs or lobbyists and really wanting to get money on a grassroots level from the people, which is what I've seen, kind of a foundation of those kind of groups. How has that been going? I mean, when you've been speaking to the public, what kind of groundswell have you been seeing from constituents?
There are a lot of people who are really excited, people who've been wanting more of a progressive who supports things like Medicare for all, ensuring that everybody has a home, everybody has a job. The Green New Deal, people have been asking for these things for years and not been able to get it from our representation. And so I've been getting a lot of interest, and different groups of people in different parts of the district are more interested in different policies, depending on what their needs are, where they are. A lot of people are really happy to hear about my policies on Social Security, a lot of others on Medicare for all. I know, Clallam County and Grays Harbor County are the top two counties in the state for opioid-related deaths. And so for me, getting addiction treatment to everybody who needs it is critical. And I see Medicare for all as a way to do that. And also there are people who may not be struggling with addiction, but they have a really hard time getting health care in rural areas because they have to drive really far. There aren't enough providers and hospitals. Really the thing that causes that is that it's not profitable to provide healthcare in rural areas because there's less density. It's kind of like opening a restaurant. You're going to have more people visiting it in Tacoma than you would in a rural area. And I think that way of running our healthcare system is wrong. It should not be about getting health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies the most profit possible. It should be about getting the people all the healthcare that they need to live a healthy life without worrying about going bankrupt.
Let's talk about some of the other issues that are a priority for you during this campaign. I mean, what are you focusing on, and what are you learning as you speak to people? Has your priorities changed at all, or has it stayed pretty consistent?
I'd say the biggest change has happened with coronavirus. I've been pretty disappointed with the federal government's response. For example, I am self-employed, and so I qualified for a small business loan. But they ran out of funds before they got to my applications, and then I had to wait. And then also there was a friend of mine has not received any unemployment benefits from the state for 4 weeks because they froze all unemployment payments while they were trying to deal with fraud issues. And so it's important to deal with fraud, of course, but then, there's people like my friend who need that money to pay rent. So for me, coronavirus is what has shifted some of my policies. For example, I think that I stand with people who are calling for $2,000 a month cash to everybody in this country so that they can pay their bills. I also think that more should have been done, more money put into keeping people on payroll so that their boss, their companies could pay their payroll, because it's much harder to get somebody who's unemployed for them to get a job than it is to just keep them in the job they have. And so those are a couple issues where my policies have changed in response to coronavirus.
And what are you hearing from people? Of course, door knocking and the town hall events are kind of on hold right now due to the virus. But when you're doing phone calls and researching online, I mean, people, are they opening up to these ideas if they hadn't been on board before?
Yeah, they are. And I just talk to people about these things in terms about how it affects their life. For example, about a year ago, and this was not for the campaign, but I was canvassing with a group that supports the Green New Deal, and specifically making sure it benefits rural Washington. And we went door to door and we were talking to people about it and explaining what it is. And then at the end of the conversation, we would show them a list of policies and ask which of these would be most important to you to have be part of the Green New Deal. And there were things like, if there's a jobs guarantee, that means everybody can work. That means that parents will need help with childcare. So universal childcare would be part of it. A guaranteed union job would be part of it. And so there were, a list of policies, and people who, we did not ask for their political affiliation, but some people volunteered and told us they're conservative. And they would look at this and say, well, I don't know. It's hard to say because I really like all of these policies. So I think when you get away from the partisanship and just talk about the policies and how they affect people's lives, that's what people really care about. They're open to it. They start supporting it. And our district has a really interesting progressive history. Our first representative in the 30s, he proposed a constitutional amendment to limit personal income. I'm not saying that's something I support, just that it's a very progressive policy. And that was almost 100 years ago that he proposed that. And over the years, we've had a lot of, progressive activism in this district. So I am finding a lot of support for these things. In different areas, I hear different issues that are very local. For example, on the Northern Olympic Peninsula, people are very affected by growlers, airplanes that fly over, Navy airplanes that are extremely loud. That's an issue that's really affecting people there. In Tacoma, we have a lot of gentrification, neighborhoods where people are being forced out basically by rising rents, and these are neighborhoods that have been, predominantly African American for years and years, and a really rich culture and history. And so housing is really important there, and also with housing, making sure that the housing helps, people who are from the neighborhood stay there and not get displaced. So those are a couple issues I've heard around the district. On Bainbridge, there are people who work in the grocery stores on Bainbridge, but they can't afford to live there. So they have, an hours-long commute every day to work a low-wage job. Often doesn't come with benefits. In Aberdeen, I heard from before the pandemic when I was canvassing, somebody who lives in an apartment building, and she said when the river flooded, it would come up around their apartment building, and that's obviously a concern, and I think that will happen more with climate change, and so that's something that I would hope to address with the Green New Deal. So those are some of the local issues that I've heard about.
There obviously are a lot of different districts and different needs as you look through the 6th congressional district. But if you were to speak to residents in Grace Harbor, Pacific County, Cullom, Jefferson, and throughout the 6th, I mean, in kind of basic terms, why Rebecca Parson for Congress to represent us?
I am the only Democrat in the race who has never flip-flopped on Social Security, will never flip-flop on Social Security, who supports jobs for all, housing for all, and health care for all without co-pays, deductibles, or premiums. That would be my short answer.
Rebecca Parson is running for Congress to represent the Olympic Peninsula and the 6th Congressional District. You can find out more. You can follow along on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all at Rebecca for WA or RebeccaForWA.com, as ballots are going to start coming out and leading into the primary. But we do thank you for joining us this morning, and we look forward to speaking with you as the campaign progresses through the pandemic and going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Kyle. Appreciate it.